In the last lesson, we were working in Flash, and the goal of that lesson was to get you to think about the spacing between all of your frames in a very concrete way, and to sort of help train your brain a little bit for when we go back into After Effects and it's not as obvious that you should be thinking about spacing. All right, so let's hop into After Effects, and I'm going to show you how to translate this type of movement and this type of spacing into the curve editor. So you'll be able to download this After Effects project, which will have everything in it that we're about to cover. And one of the things that I've included is this comp called ChartViz, and I created it just to give you a way to sort of practice visualizing what different spacings you can get by changing the animation curves inside of After Effects. So let's talk about animation curves. Inside of After Effects, you generally don't think about the spacing between your frames because all you're doing is setting a keyframe at the beginning and a keyframe at the end of your animation, and everything in the middle happens automatically. All right, and you're probably all aware that if you select your keyframes like this, and you go up to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease, or you can just hit F9, then it will apply some easing to those keyframes. And you can see up here, this is automatically changed to show you what the new spacing is. All right, so you can see that now the first few frames are closer together, and then they spread out, and then they get closer together at the end. So it's speeding up and slowing down. All right, so let's set these back to linear. I'm just holding Command and clicking these keyframes. It'll set them back to a linear interpolation, and you can see that the spacing here reflects that. So if you select the X position property, which is the only property that's animated, and you click this button here, Graph Editor, this is what you're going to see, okay? And we are going to spend quite a bit of time in this Graph Editor. In fact, I am going to I'm going to make this even bigger so we can see it better. Okay. Now, when you're in the Graph Editor, if you wanted to say like maximize this area so that the graph took up the whole thing, you can hit the plus and minus key on the top row of your keyboard to zoom in, and you can sort of move back and forth that way. You can also click this button here. It looks like two little lines, and it will say Fit All Graphs to View. Okay, and that will do the same thing. So you can see that with linear spacing. And by the way, just so you guys are aware, this comp, it will only show you the chart if your playhead is lined up on the last keyframe. If it's somewhere in the middle, it's not going to show you all of the frames because the frames haven't been created yet. So in the Graph Editor, when we have linear spacing, we also have a linear curve, okay? And the way the Graph Editor works is on the x-axis, right, this horizontal axis, as you move from left to right, you're moving forward in time. So this is the beginning of your move, and this is the end of your move. Now, the vertical axis, up and down, is the value, okay? And let me first be very clear. There are two types of graphs that this area can show you. There's a value graph, and there's something else called a speed graph. And by default, if you select the X position and you just have one property selected, it's going to show you the value graph. And the way you change between the two is there's a button down here. And if you click this and you switch it to Edit Speed Graph, it's going to show you something very different. So if you're looking at your graph and it looks like this, you're probably in the wrong graph, and you want to make sure you're looking at the value graph. We're going to talk about the speed graph, but that's a little bit later. So for the value graph, time is left to right, and then value is top to bottom. So you can see the value is increasing over time in a very linear fashion. So if I select these points like this, and this is the same as selecting keyframes too. If I switch back to this view, you can see those keyframes are now selected. So the points you see on the graph, those are the keyframes. And if you see this big white box here, you can turn that on and off using this button right next to the magnet. That's called the transform box, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes too. But for now, I don't want it, so we're just going to select the two endpoints on this graph. We're going to hit F9. And that's going to set the easy ease, okay? And now you can see the spacing has changed. We get an ease at the beginning and an ease in at the end. And look at what the graph is doing, right? The graph is now updated to show you. So in traditional animation, this is a spacing chart, and this is the After Effects graph that creates this, okay? And so what you want to do is start to develop the ability to just look at an animation curve like this and know what's going on. All right, so and a good rule of thumb, a good way to think about this is that when you're looking at an animation curve that's showing you the change in value over time, the steeper that curve is, the faster the object is moving at that point in time. So it's very important to notice, for example, if I select this keyframe now has a Bezier handle coming out of it, and you can grab this and move this around like this, okay? If the Bezier handle is flat, what that means is that for at least that one frame, the graph is actually flat, which means there is no movement, okay? So when you have a curve like this, where at the beginning and the end it flattens out, that means it is stopping, totally stopping, okay? And if you bend this down just a little bit, that means that it's actually never stopping. And so if you had more keyframes that came after this, you would never actually have the curve stop. It would just continue. But if this is flat, then it will absolutely stop. At the same time, if you pull this way down like this, well, now it's moving really, really quickly. All right, so what I want you guys to do is just play around with this and look up here at what is happening when you adjust these, okay? So again, we're not changing the timing at all. We're only changing the spacing. So if I take this Bezier handle and I pull it way out like this, you can see that the easing gets even more extreme here. You have really tight spacing at the beginning. And then towards the middle, you have these two frames, 12 and 13, which are really, you know, like very far apart from each other. And then again at the end, the spacing gets very tight one more time. And looking at the curve, you can see you've got flat, 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 and then very steep right here. Okay, so steepness equals speed. All right, just remember that rule. Steepness is speed, flatness is slow. All right, so you know, hopefully this will start to click for you guys, and you'll see that, you know, if I have it steep at the beginning, well, then there's no easing at the beginning, right? And you know, you'll start to kind of get the hang of this, and really, you know, you'll be able to create moves that do exactly what you want. And I want you to play around with this because I want you to notice things like this, okay? Here I have this S curve, right? And sometimes I'll refer to this as an S curve because it's vaguely S-shaped, and this is a very common shape that you'll see in a curve editor. And if you look, you know, the middle of the move, right, is right here, okay? This line moves from here to here, and right here is the midpoint. But if you look at the way this curve is set up, frame 8 is in the middle. Now, this is a 20 frame move, so that's like almost halfway, right? But look, frame 10 is way over here. So just by moving these Bezier handles a little bit, you can actually change the feel of this animation quite a bit. All right, if I do something like this, right, where it's getting very steep at the end, right? Now frame 10 is way back here. So you've got 20 frames of animation, but frame 10's over here now. And before it was way over here. So again, the timing has not changed, but the spacing has changed. Now another thing you can do with this comp, you can play with the timing if you wanted to see what that would do too. All you have to do is move these keyframes around. So I'm gonna move this keyframe over like this and then move the playhead to the end. All right, so now I've got a 29 frame move, and you can see that, I mean, the spacing is so extreme that you can't even read what these numbers are until frame 22. Okay, so the animation is almost over before you actually get any kind of movement because we've got such an extreme curve. And actually, the curve is so extreme now that it actually bends down like this. Okay, and we'll talk more in later lessons about what that means and why that happens. But so use this to kind of play around with timing and spacing, right? Look at this. This is bizarre. This is something you don't normally see in motion graphics. It's sort of shooting in and then slowing down almost to a stop in the middle, right? And you can kind of see like the middle here is this flat part. Well, maybe that's too flat, so you could adjust that so it's not getting, you know, that flat. There is still some movement there, right? So this is a great way to kind of get the hang of visualizing spacing using the curves, which in After Effects, this is how you do spacing. Okay, cool. So now let's move on and let's talk about how to actually apply some of this stuff to your work. So here is just a simple example. All right, so let's say that you've got these 3 icons and it's part of a video. You want to animate them on screen. So this is a way that I've done this myself in the past before I really knew what I was doing, and I've also seen this done a million times, right? And it's basically you're just scaling everything up from 0% to 100%. Okay? And this doesn't look too bad, and you know, most likely your client would be like, yes, that's fantastic. But there's so much more you could do to this, okay? And if I show you the keyframes for this, every single one is the same. It's just going from 0 to 100, and I easy ease to the last keyframe. That's it, okay? So, you know, once you get the hang of animation curves and you start to learn a few more animation tricks, I want you to always be asking yourself, how could this thing move that's better? And this is something that, you know, when we get a little bit more to animation philosophy, and there's a great interview with Sander van Dyk as part of this course, where he talks about always thinking about why something's moving, and not just moving it because it should move, and it's boring if it doesn't move, but why is it moving, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of walk you through the process that I would sort of go through if I was going to animate this, okay? And you'll just have to bear with me because I don't know how long or tedious this is going to be, but I think it's important to just sort of see, you know, what you can do just using the animation curve editor in After Effects, only using position, scale, rotation, and not really doing anything fancy, okay? Now, just a quick technical note, the way this comp is set up, I've got everything sort of layered out, right? So, for example, knife, plate, and fork all kind of layered out. And then I've got a null that I've turned off on each one so that I can actually adjust each set kind of separately. And if you aren't familiar with nulls and parenting, then there is a bonus video in today's group on the course site, and it'll walk you through a couple of extra things really quickly. All right, so let's start with this airplane. Okay, so for example, on the airplane, maybe what the airplane does, right? Airplanes move, right? So maybe this airplane flies in like this. Okay, so let's do that. Let's say we want that airplane to take 10 frames to fly in. So I'm gonna hit Option P. Okay, and for now, I want you to get in the habit whenever you animate the position of something, I want you to right click or control click position and say separate dimensions. All right, this is gonna, you don't always do this, but for most things I do, and I'll show you why in a second. So now let's go back to the beginning of the animation, and let's move this down like this, and you can see that the motion path is gonna help me line up where that airplane should be coming in from. And if we just left it like that, right, that wouldn't really look very nice, would it? No. So what we're going to do is easy ease those last keyframes. All right. And so now it's going to kind of come in and slow down just a little bit, but it still is pretty abrupt, right? Because it's only a 10-frame animation. So what I might do is say, okay, well, I want that airplane to fly in, but then really slow down and settle. So maybe what I should do is come into the graph editor, and I'm going to select both X position and Y position so I can see them at the same time. And so what you're seeing, and After Effects helps you by color coding things, Y is green, X is red. So you can see that over time, the Y value is decreasing, right? Because in After Effects, the coordinates, you know, the way the coordinate system works, going from left to right, X increases. Going from top to bottom, Y increases. So it actually, it's kind of counterintuitive, but when you increase the Y value, layers move down. Okay, and so we are decreasing the Y value, decreasing the Y value, and then it's moving the plane up. All right, and then the X curve is increasing. But what you can do is you can actually grab multiple keyframes and grab both Bezier handles like this. And I'm holding Shift to lock the Bezier handles, because if I don't hold Shift, then I might do something like this by accident. Okay, but I'm just gonna hold Shift, I'm gonna pull these handles out. And that's just gonna basically give me a faster movement at the beginning, right? Steepness equals speed. So it's gonna move faster at the beginning and slower at the end. Still 10 frames. So I haven't changed the timing at all, just the spacing. Okay, and there you go. That feels better to me, right? It's a little more deliberate. Cool. So now let's have that yellow circle, this layer here. Let's have that layer maybe scale up and kind of catch that airplane. Okay? So I want that circle to maybe finish right there, frame 12. So I'm going to come back to my my timeline. I'm going to hit Option S, and then I'll move back maybe, I don't know, 6 frames. All right, and I'm just doing that by hitting page up, page down. So again, always try to use the hotkeys. It's one of the things that separates the pros from the amateurs when you're at a studio or something, is being able to really quickly move around and do what it is you want to do. All right, so let's just turn the scale to 0. And again, let's grab both keyframes and easy ease, and let's see what that looks like. All right, so it doesn't really feel very good, right? And so what I don't like about it is that the plane feels like it's stopping, and the circle still feels like it's growing. And so I think the problem is, it could be the timing, but let's first play with the spacing. So I'm going to select both keyframes, then go to the graph editor, and you can see I've already got the graph up, ready to go. If I click this button now, fit all graphs to view, it'll zoom in as much as it can. Sometimes After Effects won't let you zoom in any further, which is kind of silly in my opinion, but that's the way it works. But so look at where the playhead is. Okay, it's right in between this keyframe and this keyframe. And because we have the default easy ease turned on, it's easing out at the same speed it eases in. Well, I actually want this circle to be much farther along by this point in the animation. Okay, so what I want to do is grab the last keyframe and pull that handle out, and look at what's happening. You can now see the playhead is touching a different part of the curve. Now, I'm going to try and talk through this again. So left to right, we're moving forward through time, and the value of the scale is increasing, okay? So from left to right, it's getting bigger. And so where my playhead intersects that curve, that's the value of the scale that I will see on this frame. All right, so if I pull this back this way, the scale will be smaller on that frame. And if I pull it this way, it'll be bigger on that frame. Okay? So I could pull this handle out. Another thing I could do is break this handle up this way. Okay? And maybe that's fine. Maybe we don't really need an ease on the beginning there. So now let's play the animation. All right, and that feels better. It feels like it's catching the plane. Okay, so again, not changing the timing at all, just working with the spacing made the animation feel better. All right, so now what could we do with those clouds? Well, maybe what we could do is select all of them. Okay, and once that plane lands, maybe the clouds sort of float down from the sky. Okay, so what I want to do is let's move forward to frame 11. And I don't want the clouds to exist before then, so I'm actually going to pull the layers forward like this. Okay. Another handy hotkey when you're working in After Effects is to hold the space bar, and it'll turn your icon into a hand, and you can move your timeline like this. You can sort of just scrub down back and forth. And then the plus and minus keys, of course, to zoom in and out. So what I want to do is move forward maybe 8 frames. Just like that. And I'm going to put a position keyframe on each of these, so Option P. I am going to then control-click the position and say Separate Dimensions. And I only want to animate the Y position. I don't want the X position. So I'm going to turn off X. Then I'm going to select all of these and hit U. And the U key, it's sometimes called the Uber hotkey. All it does is it reveals every keyframed property on a layer. So rather than having the X and Y visible, because X is not keyframed, I only want the Y. So I hit U and it just shows me Y. So now let's move back to the beginning. And let's move each of these up a little bit. Just like that. Okay? And then I'm going to select both keyframes on all 3 layers and hit F9 to easy ease them. And let's just take a look at this. Let's see how this is working. Yeah, terrible. Doesn't look good at all. So, what can we change? Well, first, I do want to change the timing just a little bit so they don't all come in at the same time. So let me take maybe the second one and move it forward 2 frames, and then take this one and move it forward another 2 frames. So you get a little bit of an offset. We're going to talk a lot about offset in a later lesson, but it's never too early to start learning stuff. So offsetting animation is always a great trick to make things look better. All right, so now I'm going to select all of the Y positions, okay, at the same time. And there's many ways you can do that. The way I just did it was click one of them and then hold Command, and that'll let you select multiple properties. So then let's go to the graph editor, and you can see all three graphs, and they're all slightly different, but they're the same shape. And so what you can do is you can grab all three of them at the same time. Let me turn that little box off. And you can actually manipulate them all at the same time like this. And so what I'm doing is I'm basically getting rid of the ease at the beginning, and then I'm going to grab those last keyframes and have them ease at the end, right? And so now when I play it, it'll look kind of like they're dropping into place. All right? So now let's go back to the quote bad version, right? And look at what's happening here. So first of all, the animation itself is just a little bit lifeless because it's that default ease, all right? So it doesn't really have much feel to it. But on top of that, there's no purpose to the animation, right? And so that's just a habit I want you all to get in the habit of doing. Anytime you're animating something and you're trying to think of how the heck it should animate, think about what's motivating that animation. In this case, it's not that hard. It's an airplane, okay? So an airplane flies through the sky, so it should probably move a little bit and fly through the sky. Cool? So let's move on to the next icon. So you've got these passports, okay? And the passports have been broken up where you've got the yellow passport and then the type, and then the blue passport and the type. Okay, so let's start with the yellow passport, and I'm just gonna solo it for a minute. So one thing, if you are if you're unfamiliar with what this little doodad is in the middle of this layer, that is called the anchor point. And the anchor point dictates the way a layer is going to get transformed or move if you scale it or rotate it. Okay, and it does a few other things, but those are the two main ones. So, for example, if I just start scaling this up and down right now, you see it scales from the middle. If I hit the Y key, and the Y key actually activates this, the pan behind tool, I can move the anchor point. So, for example, I can move it down to this corner. And now if I scale it, it's going to scale from that corner. It's the same thing with rotation. If I start rotating it, it will rotate from that corner. But if I move the anchor point here, it will rotate from that corner. Okay, so you always want to make sure that if you're going to scale or rotate a layer that you put the anchor point where it should be. So let's say that I want, I don't know, maybe I want these passports to kind of rotate up and flip up like cards on a table or something. So an easy way to do that would be put the anchor point actually outside the layer like this. And now it'll look like it's being kind of brought up by hand or something, like an invisible hand. All right, so let's go forward and let me grab all of these layers and move them forward like this so they don't actually show up until after the airplane icon's been created. By the way, another great hotkey. If you want to move all of these layers to begin where your playhead is, the left bracket does that. Okay? And the right bracket brings the end of the layer to where your playhead is. So left and right bracket, two more great hotkeys. All right, so yellow passport. So let's have this thing kind of scale up and rotate in at the same time. So let's go forward 10 frames. So I'm going to hit Shift, page down, and that's going to jump me forward 10 frames. All right, so again, hotkeys. If I know a lot of these are on the After Effects Hotkeys PDF, but if I throw out some other ones, try to write them down. Try to remember these and start using them. So I'm going to put a keyframe on rotation and on scale, and then I'm going to go to the beginning. And I'm just going to have this thing start maybe way down here, rotated way down there. And the scale, maybe not all the way to 0. Maybe it's 30. You know, one thing that a lot of beginning animators are afraid to do is to just have stuff pop on screen like that. Because, I don't know, maybe it's just sort of your intuition's telling you things don't pop into existence and you should just, it should always be from nothing comes something and not like this thing just pops into, on the screen by magic. But when you're animating, your eye can't really catch those things. And sometimes it feels good when stuff pops on screen, and it's just kind of a style that you can play with. So you don't always have to have stuff enter from off screen or scale up from 0 or have some crazy wipe or something like that. You can just pop things on sometimes and it's fine. So that's what we're going to do for this. And why don't we come back here and just play that. Just take a look at that motion right there. All right, does not feel good. Not at all. It's very stiff. All right, so you probably can figure out what we're going to do. We're going to easy ease both of these, and we'll go into the graph editor, and you can see both curves, right? So scale is this curve, rotation is this curve, and they both have the same shape. And if you select them both like this, After Effects will fit them both into the graph editor. Now, that's really handy a lot of the times because you can then manipulate both of them at the same time. Sometimes, though, if your two properties have very different values, right? Like, if, for example, if the rotation was, let's go back to this keyframe here. If the rotation was much less than it is. Actually, let me delete this keyframe for a minute, right? And I'll just rotate this a little bit. There we go, like that. And now if I select both of these and go to the graph editor, you can see that now this curve is so squashed visually because After Effects is trying to fit both curves into the graph editor at the same time. So you might look at this and say, wow, that is a flat S-curve. Well, it's actually not. If I just select rotation, it'll scale the graph so now we see the full rotation curve. And now you can see that it actually has an S-curve. But when you try to fit both of them on the graph at the same time, you can run into trouble. So that's something that you need to just be aware of if you're working on multiple properties at the same time in the graph editor. If you see something like this, it might be just squished visually, okay? And it'll make it very hard to adjust these Bezier handles with any kind of accuracy. All right, so let's fix that back to what it was. So this keyframe was 0 degrees. So here's another cool little thing you can do. You can double click keyframes in the graph editor and this little window pops up and you can just type in the value you want. All right, and so now I can select both of these and they do sort of fit together. So I definitely want a nice long ease at the end, okay? And, you know, up until this point, I've been sort of grabbing multiple values and doing them all the same, but you don't have to do them all exactly the same. You can have them be a little different. So what's happening here is the scale is changing at a little bit different of a rate than the rotation is. And that's going to make those two things have a little bit of an offset feel, right? And so that can give things a little bit more of a handmade feel. So let's take a look at that. It's a subtle thing, but it can be nice. All right, so that's working pretty well. I think what I might want to do is have the scale actually have a pretty big pop at the beginning. So I'm going to grab that handle and point it up. Remember, steepness is speed. So now at the beginning, the scale is going to change very quickly, right? Cool. So now it's got a little bit more of like a flip to it. Cool. So let's say we like that. And then the next layer we want to bring on is this yellow type. So maybe once this flips on, we want that to write onto the passport. Now, one thing I definitely want to do is parent that type to the yellow passport. Okay, and again, if you're unfamiliar with parenting, watch the bonus video. And so now that will stick to the passport. And what I want to do is maybe just zoom in and let's just have this type kind of, I don't know, like appear on the passport. So to do that, we're going to have to get a little bit fancier. This is still pretty basic stuff, and if you're unfamiliar with the way alpha mats work, that also is in the bonus video. So what I'm going to do is just create a new solid layer that I'm going to call yellow type matte, and I'm going to make it bright pink so I can see it. All right, I'm going to hit that left bracket key so I can bring that layer forward right there, and I'm going to make it a different color too. I'm going to, just the layer color, not the actual color of the solid, but I'll make it like orange or something so now I can see it. All right, and then what I want to do is grab my yellow type layer. I don't see the column here for my alpha matte, so there's two ways to reveal that. You can either click this button or you can hit F4, and I'm going to tell yellow type to use the yellow type matte layer as its alpha matte. Okay, so After Effects is going to hide this layer, and you can see it's giving me these little icons. So what this means is now I can make a mask on this matte layer. So I'm just going to take my pen tool here. All right, it's making this silly curvy path because I have Roto Bezier turned on. So let me delete that. And we'll redo that. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick, simple mask like this. And then I'm going to hit Option M. And what that does is that puts a keyframe on the mask path. Now, if you can't remember that keyframe, or that hotkey, all you have to do is open up your mask properties and put a keyframe on mask path. And now let's go back to the beginning of that layer. The hotkey to go to the beginning of any layer that you have selected is I, and to go to the end it's O for in and out. And then I'm just going to, well, there's one more step we got to do too. But it's already working, you can see what it's doing. But what I want to do is parent this mat to the passport. Right, so I've got the word passport parented to the passport, and now I've also got the mat parented, so now they'll move together. There we go. And so then what I can do is reveal my keyframes, and we can just go back a few frames, and I can select these two mask points and scooch them down like this to kind of erase the word. And then I can move this keyframe back like this. Okay, so when this passport pops into the screen like this, then right as it's starting to land, right in there, that's where I want the word to start appearing. So I'm just going to take these layers here, right? Sorry, not those layers. The type and the mat. And I'm going to scoot them forward a little bit in time. There we go. All right, so now the passport swings up on screen and the word passport appears. Now that word passport sort of appears in this very boring linear way. I also need to add some frames to this animation. So let's make this 5 seconds long. And I'm just going to go to the end here really quickly and drag all of these layers out so that they all last all the way to the end. There we go. All right, so we can do the same sort of thing that we did with position, scale, rotation. You can do the same sort of thing on other properties too. Now, I'm showing you this because this is sort of a special case. When you have a mask and you're animating it, okay? So I'm animating the mask path. And I hit F9. And now we go to the graph editor. This looks a little strange, doesn't it? There are certain properties in After Effects that you cannot use the value graph with. So if I click this button, you'll see it's saying Edit Value Graph, but this is not the value graph. This is the speed graph. Okay, and you can see that it doesn't matter what this is set to, the graph doesn't change. Okay, so it's a little bit confusing, but basically this mask path, if you think about what I'm doing, I'm basically changing the coordinates of 4 different points on the mask, and all of those coordinates are being contained in these 2 keyframes. Okay, so After Effects doesn't give you the option of keyframing the speed of each coordinate at the same time. It only lets you change the speed at which the entire mask changes. And so because that's the way After Effects works, it doesn't give you a really kind of nice, easy to understand graph. Like if I select the rotation and I go back to the value graph here, you can see, okay, over time the rotation is increasing and then it slows down here. On the mask path, you don't get that. You get this hump. What this is basically showing you is that the speed at which that mask changes starts at 0, and then it speeds up, and then it slows down. And we're going to get a lot deeper into the speed graph in the next lesson, actually. But for now, I want to show you that really when you're doing stuff and you have to use the speed graph, the easiest way to think about it is grab the Bezier handle and tug on it, and that makes the ease longer. Okay? Same on this end. And if you don't want it to ease at the beginning, you just push it in like this. Okay? So it's just think about like tugging that Bezier handle. Man, that sounds dirty. Tug that Bezier handle. It makes the ease take longer. Okay? So let's just hit play and see what that looks like now. All right, so that's a little bit better. But in this case, I do think I want to speed it up. I actually want that animation to happen faster. So I'm going to change the timing. To change timing in After Effects, you just move keyframes around. Just like that. So now that'll happen faster. That's better. Cool. Right? And one of the things I like about it too is that this passport is sort of flipping on and it's going clockwise like this, right? It's going around. And as it's finishing, the motion of the word passport's also going from left to right. So it's reinforcing that screen direction, okay? That's one of the things I'm going to keep coming back to in this course, is reinforcing the motion that's already there. If you're trying to figure out how to make a bunch of things move, make sort of the main thing move, and then all of the secondary pieces can just reinforce that movement. That's an easy way to make something feel good. All right, so now we've got a nice animation for that, and I want to do the same thing on the blue passport. So let me just turn that on. And the beauty is, now that I've got a good movement on the yellow passport, right, with this scale and rotation, I can select these keyframes and hit Command C, and then come up to my blue passport, figure out where I want that to appear. Maybe that appears here. And I can paste those keyframes. Right? Now, actually, before I do that, I should move the anchor point to where I want it. So let's move that anchor point down here and paste it. And now that blue passport's going to do the same thing. Right? And then I can do the same thing with the blue type. So I want the blue type to sort of start appearing right about there. All right, and I'm going to need to parent it to the blue passport. And I'm also going to need a mat for it. So let me just duplicate this mat. Move it up here, and we'll call this blue type mat. We'll move it over so it lines up with the blue type layer. We're going to parent it to the blue passport so it moves with the blue passport. And now you can see that this mask doesn't line up anymore. But I do like the way that that mask opens up, so I don't really want to change that. So rather than change the mask path, I'm actually just going to rotate and move this layer around. All right, so I'm rotating it, and then I'm going to use my arrow keys to move it around like this, just to adjust it. And then I'm going to tell my blue type layer to use that mat as an alpha mat. Beautiful. There we go. All right, so let's see what we have so far. Let me scale this to fit. All right, and we'll unsolo these layers. I'm going to go to the beginning and set my ins and outs. Remember, the B and N key move those in and out markers on your comp. So let's just play the first 2.5 seconds. Cool. So airplane flies in, passports swoop in, and I think I want the passports to swoop in a little bit closer together in time. So maybe I'll just move these back. There we go. Awesome, and this is starting to shape up into a nice feeling animation, and you can see that really we have not done anything fancy. This is all very, very simple stuff, but it's two things. It's thinking about why things are animating, so you're animating with a purpose, and it's using that graph editor to really manipulate the spacing to get the feel that you want. Okay, so let's do this last set of icons now. This one should be pretty simple. So we've got a knife, a fork, and a plate. So maybe for this one, maybe the plate just kind of scales up, right? Kind of like this little circle did. So we'll move the layer to where we want it to begin. So maybe here. I'm going to go forward 10 frames. So shift page down, and I'm going to hit Option S, right? Keyframe or hotkeys, people, hotkeys. We'll go back to the beginning of the layer, and we'll set the scale to 0. All right. So this actually will scale from nothing. So then I'm going to easy ease these. We'll go into the graph editor, and let's try just doing a really, really extreme S-curve, right? And so an extreme S-curve like this, it means that at the beginning, right, the plate is barely scaling up, but then over these next few frames it goes really quick, and then it slows down again, right? And so if I just play that little section, right, you could see how it has this nice little, like you see it and it's really small, but you can tell it's moving, and then all of a sudden, whoop, right? This, man, you need sound effects for this really to work. Bloop. All right, so that gives it this nice kind of fun little bouncy feel, like it's like, wait for it, whoa! All right, and then let's do the fork and the knife. So maybe what we could do is take both of those layers, and we'll start them here. So right after this thing starts to move, we'll have those things fly in. So I'm going to zoom out here. I'm going to reveal the position properties. Just hit P. I'm going to select both those properties, right click or control click, and say separate dimensions. And then let's go forward, I don't know, 8 frames. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Put keyframes on the Y positions. Then we'll go back to the beginning. And so maybe what we do is we have the fork shoot up from the bottom, and we have the knife come down from the top. So I'm going to move that fork down like this. I'm going to move the knife up like this. Okay. And then I'm going to select both of those, hit F9, go to the graph editor. All right, and you can see because I still have my X position selected, I'm seeing this red line. So I don't want that. I just want to do, and let's just do one thing at a time. So I'm going to click the Y position of the knife, and it's going to show me this graph, and I'm going to hit this button here so it fits that graph so I can see it a little better. And I want that knife to come in and really ease hard, really hard. I want that to shoot in. So I'm actually going to pull this curve way up and this curve out. Okay, so again, steepness equals speed. So it's going very fast and then slows down. So basically it moves most of the way down in the first 2 frames. And then it takes the rest of the time to just slowly go the rest of the way. All right, and then we'll do the same thing with the fork. Now the fork, you can see that that property, there's a good thing to point out. So the knife, because it's moving down, that means the value of Y is actually increasing, because remember After Effects is backwards in that respect, right? So if I want the first part of that move to happen really fast, I'm actually pulling this handle up. But the fork is doing the opposite. The fork is moving up into the screen, which means its Y value is decreasing. So what I want to do in this case is pull this handle down. All right, so these curves, they might be upside down to each other sometimes. If I look at both of these together, you can see that they are just inverses of each other. They're opposites. Okay, so you just always need to be aware of which direction the value is moving so that you can bend these Bezier handles in the right way. Because if you did something like this, it's going to make a very different move. All right, so we're doing something like this. We're going to pull this handle out. And we probably want the fork to enter the screen a little bit before the knife because in general, your eye is going to read things from left to right, especially in the US because that's the way we read. So let's have the fork come in first. And then we'll have the knife come in a couple frames later. All right, and we'll just play that section real quick. Cool, right? And the way they just shoot in really fast, it's nice. All right, now they do shoot in so fast that you can see the first frame that the fork is actually in the frame. It's already like that far into the frame. And the same with the knife. So you may want to take both of these ending keyframes and just push them out 1 frame. So you're changing the timing to give the animation just a little extra time to hang on screen. That does feel a little bit better. And hopefully you guys can see the difference. Let me do that one more time because another big theme of this whole animation bootcamp is 1 frame can make a huge difference. Right here I feel like I don't really see the fork and the knife enter the frame. I don't feel them. They just seem like they're kind of appearing, and then I put 1 extra frame in that animation, and all of a sudden I do feel like I can feel them come in. It's a subtle thing, but you want to be thinking at that level. You want to always be trying to find those nuances to your animation that make it feel better than the other freelancer that could be booked instead of you, if you're competitive like that. All right, so now we've created this animation of these 3 icons animating on, and really the only thing we've manipulated is position, scale, rotation, and a mask, just to bring the word passport on, okay? So your homework assignment for today is going to involve doing something very much like this. It's very similar to the After Effects evaluation, but hopefully now you've got kind of a different mindset about the possibilities you have just using very, very simple animation. We haven't talked about moving things in a curved motion path. We haven't gotten into any other animation principles like anticipation or overshoot or follow through. All we're doing is playing with spacing, and you can still make your animations look really cool. All right? So before we get to your homework, I do want to talk about one more thing. So what I want to show you is how to start using animation curves in After Effects in ways that don't really use position, scale, and rotation. You know, those properties are really the building blocks of a lot of animation, and those are the most intuitive to start using. But the beauty of After Effects or Cinema 4D or any app that you're using is that it gives you a lot of other cool ways of using animation. So this is just a quick Illustrator shape I made. It's the infinity symbol. I made it in Illustrator because it's a lot easier to make in Illustrator than After Effects, and you can just select it, copy, and then go into After Effects, and I'm going to paste it as a shape layer. So the way I do that is to just add a new shape layer, and we'll call it infinity. And then I'm going to add a path. I'm going to open the path up and click the stopwatch just to add a keyframe, and then I'm going to hit paste. And what that does is it pastes the path from Illustrator inside the path in After Effects. And if I double click this path, I can then scale it up like this, make it bigger. And after I do that, I can add a stroke, otherwise you won't actually see the path. You always have to have a stroke or a fill on a shape layer, or it won't show up as anything. Alright, and we can pick some nice color and increase the stroke width. And there you go. And then I'm going to add a trim paths. Trim paths is one of the most common sort of shape layer modifiers that you can add, and it lets you only see part of the path and animate it on if you want to. So I could basically take this end property and animate it like this, right, and draw this thing on. What I want to do in this case is have a little piece of that infinity symbol showing and then sort of offset it so that it animates through the symbol like this. And what I want to do is have this shape sort of follow the rules of gravity, I guess. So if I'm, if it's coming over this hump, it's going to pick up speed, and then it's going to slow down, and it's going to go a little faster, and then it's going to slow down. And I want it to feel a little bit like a roller coaster, like, slowing down on the hills and then coming down faster. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to start by finding a position that this can start in where the speed it's traveling has sort of reached the beginning or the end. And what I mean is there's going to be periods where it's slowing down and then it's speeding up and then it's slowing down. So I want to make this loopable. So I'm going to do it, I'm going to make sure that the first frame is at the end of one of these periods of either slowing down or speeding up. So if this thing is animating this way, like kind of clockwise, that means that it just finished coming uphill, so it's slowing down, and now it's in a period where it's going to speed up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a keyframe on offset. I'm going to go forward 2 seconds, and I want to make this loopable, so I want this thing to make one complete revolution. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to add one revolution to this. And so an easy way to do it is I just want this thing to travel 360 degrees. So here I've got negative 17.2 degrees. That's where it's starting. I can just type in plus 360 and it'll do the math for me, right? So I didn't have to think too hard, which is great because none of us like math, right? So now this is a seamless loop, and if I play it, you'll see it's just linear keyframes, right? And there it goes. Gorgeous. Gorgeous. And one thing to keep in mind too, if you're ever doing loopable stuff, is the first keyframe and the last keyframe are the same, so you actually don't want to play the last keyframe. You want to go one frame backwards so that you don't have that doubled frame where it kind of makes the animation feel like there's a hitch in it. Cool. All right, so here's our animation. It's great, but it's moving very linearly, and I want this to pick up speed and slow down at various points. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to step through the animation and I'm going to put extra keyframes where these speeding up and slowing down moments should happen. So right here, this is where it's starting to come down. It should start to speed up and speed up and speed up and speed up until it gets to about here. Okay? It's starting to go uphill again. Maybe that frame. So I'm going to put a keyframe there. And then I'm going to keep going forward. So it's slowing down, slowing down, slowing down. And then it gets here and it starts to come down again. It's going to start speeding up. And then it's going to speed up, speed up, speed up, and here it's going to start to slow down again, and then it's going to start looping. Okay, so what I need to do is go into the curve editor, and you can see right now we just have a straight line, okay, because we've got linear keyframes, we haven't changed anything, We don't even have easy ease turned on. If I select these keyframes, you won't even see Bezier handles, okay, because they're linear keyframes. So the first step is select all the keyframes, and you can do that just by tapping on the property over here. And then over here, you can see the button for easy ease. So you can just click it, and there you go. Now it's easy ease all of these. If you go back to the timeline, you'll see the easy ease icon. And so now we can grab these Bezier handles and start adjusting things, okay? So let's figure out how this needs to go at the beginning. At first, it is speeding up. Now remember that steepness equals speed and flatness equals, you know, either not moving at all or very little movement. So at the beginning, this is flat, okay? So that means that it's starting from a complete standstill, which we probably don't want. We probably want it to be moving a little bit, so I'm just going to point this up a little bit. But now, on this keyframe, it's supposed to be accelerating into that keyframe. So that means I actually want the curve to look like this, right? And I want you to think about why that is. Why do you want the curve to look like this? It's flatter at the beginning and steeper at the end. And remember, steepness is speed. So it's speedier, it's faster at the end than the beginning. And if something is faster at the end than at the beginning, that means it's accelerating. Now, one problem we're having, you can see that when I moved this handle didn't move, okay? So what we're going to get if we leave it like this is it's going to be picking up speed, and then when it hits here, it's just going to die. It's going to feel like it hit something and slowed down instantly. We want a nice smooth curve. So you could manually just sort of do this. That works fine. But you can also select this keyframe, and you can hit Auto Bezier. If you click that, it links the two Bezier handles together. All right, and you can still make one longer than the other, but it will link them automatically for you angle-wise. Another way you can do that, by the way, let me just undo. Let me re-easy ease this, right? If you hold Option and you click one of these handles, it basically toggles between breaking the handles, and then if I let go and do it again, then it links the handles. And then if I let go and do it again, it breaks the handles. So Option on a Mac is the key that you press to toggle between those two states, or you can just click the Auto Bezier to link them like that, and Easy Ease to unlink them. All right, so now if I crank this handle down, it's going to point this one up in the air, which makes sense because now it's flatter and now steeper, and now it's steeper and then flatter. Okay, so you've got an acceleration into a deceleration. And that is what we want here. So if we just sort of scrub through, picks up speed, gets to there, and that slows down at the top. Okay, and then here, again, we don't want it to totally stop. So I'm going to click my Auto Bezier, and I don't want it totally flat, so I'm going to flatten it out. I'm holding Shift, and that's going to lock it and sort of make it go flat, but then I can just tweak it a little bit, like that. Right? So it doesn't totally stop. It keeps going, and then it picks up speed again. Now to pick up speed, remember, I'm going to click the Auto Bezier button and point these handles like this. So it's picking up speed, so it's going from flatter to steeper. All right, and you can pull these handles out and tweak them so that ease out takes longer. Okay, and then when it gets to here, it's going to start to slow down again. Remember, it's going to get a little bit flatter. We don't want it to get totally flat, though. All right, we want it to have a little bit of an angle. All right, and so now look at our curve. Look at the shape of it, right? You've got kind of this wiggly, wavy shape. But if you look at it and think about the steepness of the curve, then you can tell that here it's moving slower than here. And then it slows down again, and then it picks up speed again here. So let's just play this really quickly and see what we have. All right, so you can see that it whips a little too fast there. That's a little too fast. That feels pretty good. So that part's too fast right here where it's really steep. So what I want to do is try and match the angle of this, right? So if I look at this, I can tell that this one's a little too steep. So let me just push it a little bit that way. And little adjustments like that make such a big difference. Another thing you want to make sure, since this is supposed to loop, the angle of this Bezier handle should be pretty close to the angle of this Bezier handle. Sometimes it's tough to tell, but you can see that they are sort of pointing at each other. All right, so that seems pretty good. And now we've adjusted the steepness of both of these parts. I think this one is still a little bit steeper. And now let's play that. Great. Okay, so that feels a lot better, right? It feels like it picks up speed and there's more purpose to it. It's more intentional, okay? And once you've got that spacing down in a way that feels good, you can also accentuate it by playing with timing, right? So if I wanted, a little less time here where it's sort of slowing down and speeding up, I could just grab all these keyframes and just scoot them over, like, let's say 2 frames, okay? And then when it gets to the top here, I want this section to take a little less time. So I'm going to grab these and move them over 2 frames. Then I'll go to the last frame and go back 1, remember, because it's going to loop, so I don't want that last frame. And it's going to maintain that nice spacing, but it's just going to happen a little faster in certain parts because I've changed the timing. You can also do this in the graph editor. One of the things we haven't really talked about yet is this button here. This button, when it's active, if you select more than one keyframe, it gives you a transform box that actually lets you scale points on your graph. So you can do things like this. If I want the graph overall to just take less time, I can grab every keyframe and scale it like this, right? Or if I decided that I wanted, 2 loops to happen in the same time that 1 loop is happening, well, I could just scale the entire thing up like this until I've got a second loop, which would be, I'd have to do math now. It would be 360 degrees past this, right? So you could scale this up to, it'd probably be about 700, which would be, I don't even know, boy, I don't even want to think about it. Something like that. And so now you would have more than 1 loop happening at the same time, right? It's just kind of an interesting feel. There you go. But I don't want that. But the point is, you can also very easily scale stuff like this. And later in the course, when we get into oscillations, which it's much cooler than I just made it sound, we're going to be using this a lot because this is a great way to tweak animation and make it more extreme or less extreme without having to go in and change 50 keyframes. You can just grab a bunch of them and you can move the anchor point like to here, and then you can scale these down and you can get really interesting animations that way. But what I hope you take away from this part of this class is that understanding how the steepness of your animation curve relates to the spacing of your animation, that is the key to this entire boot camp. If you can deliberately make animation that speeds up and slows down and moves exactly the way you want, you're going to have so much control over your work, over your projects, and you're going to start to really develop that vocabulary of movement that you can pull from when you're stuck or when you're starting a new project or when you're under the gun. You're going to know that this type of movement feels good for things that kind of move in cool, loopy ways, and now you know how to do it. So, watch the next video, find out what your homework is. This lesson is so important. This might be the most important lesson in the entire boot camp, because if you don't grasp this, if you can't grasp the way the animation curves work in After Effects, the rest of the class will not be as useful to you. So watch this as many times as you need to. Take notes. Practice. I'm going to post this After Effects project on the class page so you can download it and try this stuff out if you want. And I want you to really, really, really make sure you understand this. So, thank you, and move on to the homework.